Back there. And one other reminder, our mom baby room is now available for any moms who need to step out and take care of kiddos. And I'm getting a thumbs up from Paul, which I'm assuming means that the stream is working. Or are you just thumbs upping the kids? Good. All right. So I mentioned my friends the ladies who are here today. Now over the course of the last couple months, during sermons, we've heard a few times from Smokey. So in this class I'm taking, well, if you've noticed stress about that, that is Bill Lady's fault. Bill is actually the head of the Pikes Peak Baptist Association and an adjunct professor out at our seminary. And so if Smokey has seemed especially stressed, it's been because of Bill. So now you know the answer. And again, summer is what brings him back down to earth, much as Carol does for Bill. And really, those two are a fantastic blessing to our Southern Baptist churches in Southern Colorado. Bill leads us very well, and Carol, you're awesome. Our family was fortunate that we got to go to Uganda with Carol. My first trip there in 2011. In fact, as Carol was reintroducing herself to Morris this morning, she said, I've met you before. And he's like, what? I said, really, buddy? The first time I met you, she met you. So, again, it's great to have you here. So thanks for coming. All right, so we're going to continue along in our sermon series on the book of John. Now, last week we talked about Jesus' friend Lazarus, and, well, the fact that he got real sick and he died. Now, this week is kind of the rest of the story, and I did spoil it last week by telling you that he wasn't going to stay dead, so thank you for those of you who came back in spite of the fact that you know how this story ends. There may be some things in here that hopefully we can learn from. Again, if you do learn anything, we'll chalk that up to God. If there's huge mistakes, well, you can chalk that up to me. One of those mistakes, Summer's already pointed out, if you are following along with the app, well, it still has last week's sermon title on it. If you have a paper copy, well, then it is correct. So, if you're watching online, sorry, it's wrong, but the sermon hopefully will be right. But we're going to take our reading this morning from John chapter 11, verses 28 through 44. And it says this: When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come also with her weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he have opened the eyes of the blind man? Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The man who died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Let's have a quick word of prayer before we start. So God, once again, we thank you for a chance to come to your house, to learn your word, to be filled with your spirit. God, we do ask for your blessing on our time here today. We just ask that anything that happens good here has been a great reflection of you, and that all of the mistakes here, well, we know that you'll forgive us for. So God, we commit our time to you. We thank Jesus for you. In his name, amen. Now, there's a passage I just read. I was right on top of this. Yeah, it's a little small. It's a long passage. Sorry, Mary Jane. Getting a lot of squinting back there. Okay, so you can follow along in your paper one or your mislabeled online version. But there's a few things that we learn about Jesus as we go through this. And you can see, well, most of you can see that the name of today's sermon is Loving Friend and Savior. So what can we learn from Jesus? First of all, we know that Jesus has called us to be comforted by him. Oh, wow, I forgot to print this out. So, Mary Jane, I may be doing the same thing as you, trying to read that. It says, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. So here's the thing. Jesus is calling for her to come specifically. He is saying, I know you're grieving, and I want you to come to me. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't go in and say, everybody come around so you can see what I'm doing. He said, I want to meet with you privately so that I can offer you great comfort. Jesus tells us that his burden is light. Jesus lets us know that he is there to make things easier for us. I read this example not too long ago. It was talking about bottled water. I promise there's a point to this. Now, I looked it up, and a half-liter bottle of water weighs slightly over a pound. Now, I could carry this around all day. Now, how do I know that? Because versus when I got married, I'm carrying about an extra 50 pounds. So I know I can carry 1 extra pound for a long, long time. Now, if I decide to carry it like this, I'm not going to be able to hold it for nearly as long. If I walk around like this, I'm going to guess it's not going to take more than, about now before I'm starting to feel it. In my shoulder, I'm starting to notice a little bit of pull already because your pastor is not in great shape. Now, I could probably keep it out here for half of the sermon or so, but it would start to bother me. I'd become very aware of it. The only thing I would be able to think about is what's going on in my shoulder. I'd start to feel some tension in my bicep, and I know that because I already am. But I'm going to feel a lot of discomfort, not because what I'm carrying is that heavy, but it's because how I'm choosing to carry it. Now, Jesus is saying, whatever struggle you have, I'm going to come along. I'm going to bring that back in. I'm going to prop you up. I'm going to let you hold that. Your burden is no different. It is the same weight that it was originally. But you've been trying to carry it yourself way out here. So as he's talking to Mary, he's saying, no, come on out. I want to provide you comfort. I want to help you with this burden. He's saying to her, you don't have to do this alone. Now, in verse 31, it says, when the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise and go out, they followed her. Now, I'm going to let you know up front, too, there's going to be a lot of history lesson in today's sermon as well. You may remember a few weeks ago, Smokey kind of said, today's going to be a lot of fact and maybe not so much warm and fuzzy, and you're going to get a lot of that today. But this was interesting to me. It might not be to you, but, I'm up here, so I get to decide what I say. The reason these people followed her out is because at that point in time, women were expected to lead funeral processions. And so when they saw her go, they thought, oh, well, here's the funeral march. We should follow her. Now, does anyone know why women led funeral processions at that time? It's because death came through women. Death, in a spiritual sense, was because of Eve. So it was women's fault. And therefore, they had to go out and carry the burden of death happening because of them. That's so weird. But it's what they believed at the time. Now here, and I'll try not to step on anything you might have for next week, but next week is Mother's Day. Women bring life. Let me count. There's way too many of you. There are exactly 0 of you who are here, if not for your mom. My math could be off, but it's roughly 0, with a 0% chance of me being wrong on this. And I don't say that a lot from the pulpit, but I am not wrong on this one. Women are incredible sources of life, but there was this belief at the time that women had to go out and carry this burden. But Jesus said, no. I just want you. I want to be there. I want to comfort you. Don't worry about these knuckleheads who are following you, who are trying to blame you for anything. Just come out. I want to be here for you. I want to love you. I want to comfort you. Your next fill in here. Jesus is concerned by our afflictions. Verses 32 through 36 is, now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. We saw this from her sister last week as well. And we talked about the fact that God is okay with us communicating honestly with him. God is okay with us saying, I don't like what you just did. He is concerned with our afflictions. He wants us to communicate with him. So when Jesus has now heard this from both of Lazarus' sisters, he doesn't get upset with him. He just says, okay, I understand where you are with this. Now, we talked about this in the men's group yesterday. No matter how new a Christian you are, there should be at least one Bible verse that you can commit to memory. Because John 11:35 is 2 whole words. Jesus wept. As Paul talked about during the children's story this morning, it shows his humanity. It shows Jesus' personhood. It shows that he is able to connect with us in ways that, well, it's hard to believe that God would lower his standards enough to do with us. Jesus wept. Now, we are told in the Bible that Jesus, in all ways that all people ever will be, was tempted. And when it tells us that, it's also letting us know in all ways that Jesus, or that all ways that people can feel, Jesus felt. Jesus recognized the hurting that was going along. Now, just for Larry Gooden, here's our moment of Greek for the week. The word we're looking at here is embrimeomai. And right now I'm really happy that Bill's good friend, Steve Vedito, who was my Greek professor, is not here to yell at me for my mangled pronunciation. But this verse right here, or that word right here, is where it tells us that Jesus felt deeply, or was deeply moved. This is a really strange word that gets translated most times to that he was deeply moved, because what it really means is an involuntary gasp. That was his response. Normally out of shock, out of frustration, out of anger. It is the same word that the Greeks used for the snorting of a horse. You know, when a horse is worked up and... Okay, my animal impersonations maybe aren't great. But when a horse is startled and it makes that noise, that's what it's talking about. When you are so taken aback by something that you can't hold it in. That's how Jesus responded. It's like, I get where you are. And I'm stunned by it. Now, it also talks about Jesus weeping. It's important here, and I didn't add in another Greek word. I thought that might be overkill, but there's multiple Greek words for crying. And the one that was used here was a different type of crying than is normally used in funereal type of settings. I can't imagine any of us doing this, but at that point in time, it was not uncommon in funerals for them to hire professional grievers. Especially if you were an important family, you went and hired people to be all kind of sad because you wanted everyone else to know how important this person was. Man, look at all of these sad people. But the way they expressed their sadness wasn't with a simple, crying in the corner and dabbing at their eyes with Kleenex that hadn't been invented yet. They weren't sitting in the corner just looking upset. It was wailing. It was over the top. It was ridiculous, theatrical type of crying. It was something that was meant to draw attention. Let's face it, that's why they hired them. You're not going to hire someone to do a job and then be okay with them not doing the job. So they went way over the top. Now with Jesus, he was just kind of sitting over to the side, quietly crying. Now we have a few of us in here that have more gray hair. So we may remember this old commercial about littering in the U.S., and at the end of the commercial, there was the Indian on the horse who turns out to have actually been an Italian actor, but we won't go there. But at the end of the commercial, they zoom in on him, and there's one little tear that rolls down his cheek. How many remember that commercial? All right. Yeah, mostly the people with the gray hair raising their hands. Why was that so impactful? It was the simplicity of his pain. It wasn't this guy on horseback wailing and making a big scene. It was just I'm so deeply moved by this. And so Jesus' response was going to be a lot different from what other people were seeing. And so the people around him were looking and saying, wow, he's really touched by this. I think as Jesus was crying about a couple things. One, he was weeping over the casualty. He was weeping because his friend had died. He was crying because his other friends, Mary and Martha, had lost their brother. He was crying because there were people there who loved this man, and he understood the pain that they were experiencing. Now, it also seems to be, when we get to this point where it says, so the Jews said, see how he loved him, but some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man also have kept him from dying? So there was a lot of thought that the other reason Jesus was crying was over the confusion of these people. And he had spent so much time with them already, and he's saying, I just let you know that he's coming back. I have let you know that he will be resurrected. You have seen me perform miracles. You have proclaimed that you believe that I am who I am. And now you're saying you don't believe me. And he was hurt by that. Their failure to believe that he really could do this, their confusion in the moment, broke his heart. The next thing we see, and obviously this is a pretty important one, is that Jesus is connected to the Father. In verses 40 through 42, where Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of the Father? So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. So they go over, and Jesus is telling him, move this stone away. And God, Dad, thank you. Thank you that something's going to happen here that people are going to believe. Now, the other folks have expressed a little bit of discomfort about this because, well, Lazarus has been dead for several days. The embalming process wasn't really a thing. The cave likely wasn't refrigerated. He was going to stink. It was going to be gross. Now, the way that they built the tombs at that point, they kind of dug a hole in a mountain, and normally it was 3 dead folks on one side, 3 dead folks on the other side, and 2 dead folks in the back, which A, is gross, but we don't know how long any of those other folks may have been hanging out in there either. So, Mary Jane, that was very succinct. So at the point that he says, let's go ahead and move the rock, it tells us they're saying, but he's been dead for 4 days. There may have been other people saying, there's folks that are a little riper than him. But Jesus is saying, Father, thank you. This is going to be something good. The next thing that we learn through this, though, is Jesus has a specific calling for each of us. In verse 43, when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Well, the first thing we need to realize here is when he's doing this in a loud voice, it wasn't because he was concerned that Lazarus wouldn't hear him. It wasn't because he had to speak loudly enough for the dead guy to hear it. He was doing it as a reminder to all of the other people that this was God's power. Because just before this, it says that Jesus tells God, thank you. Now, this is not included in your outline. And I forgot to print it in my notes. So, John 5:28, we read, do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out. Now, there are a good number of commentators who, when they study this passage, said part of the reason, too, that Jesus said, Lazarus, come out, is what we just read there in John 5:28, that everyone will come from the tomb. So there's a lot of folks that believe if he had just said, come out, there'd have been a short parade of folks wandering out of the tomb. He really is that powerful. But he said, Lazarus, come out, because this was Lazarus's thing. And the same is true for all of us as Christians. We have a specific thing that we are being called to. Now, a lot of times we feel like if it's not, being a pastor or being a music minister or being the youth guy or heading up an association or whatever, well, my calling really isn't that important. Summer Williams' calling to support her husband in ministry might be more important than her husband's call to ministry. And I'm not saying that as a joke. I joke a lot about Summer and how much she supports Smokey, but what she does is huge. Jim Rottenborn's calling to pray for our church and the people in it consistently and fervently is a huge calling, and he doesn't take it lightly, and he answers that call. It is very easy for us to want to ignore a call because we just don't think it's that important. Or it's not convenient. So here's a thought. If you have this regular tug on you, if you have this consistent reminder, this feeling in your heart and in your head that keeps saying, you should do this, and your thought is, it's too expensive, it's too painful, it's inconvenient, I don't want to do it, it's probably God. And I go back to 2009 when Melissa came home one day and said, I feel like I'm supposed to go to Uganda. And I said, we can't afford it. And she's like, right, I'm going. I'm sorry, we seem to have missed something here. And she said, God is telling me that I'm going. I said, and our bank account is saying we might not be going to Pueblo. And she said, but God is saying it and it's going to work. She went. 2011, she said, I strongly believe God is calling me and you and Carlene to go to Uganda. And I said, and our bank account is saying, no. We can't take that time away. We can't leave Tori for 2 weeks. We can't do this. It's inconvenient, it's expensive, it's painful, it's not going to work. And we went. Now, in 2013, when she suggested we go again, I stopped arguing. Now, the calling for us in that, although we didn't know it at the time, well, one of them's sitting right there, and her little brother's off in a classroom. We didn't know that in our life, that calling was that we were meant to adopt 2 children, that we were meant to expand our family. God knew, and thankfully, Melissa listened. So when God calls, we need to make sure we're listening for him. When God calls, he is going to speak to you individually. How many of you ever gone to the Rock and Worship Roadshow or one of those big concert kind of things? And a lot of times they will go up there and they will have child sponsorship things that go on during that. And maybe it's just me, but there's times I've sat there feeling really guilty that I haven't gone and taken a whole stack of stuff from one of the ushers. But I've been to a lot of them. A couple of years ago, we were there, and I felt convicted that we were supposed to sponsor a child that time. So we do. That was a time that God said, this is your call. Even though there was a call to the however many people were sitting inside the World Arena that night, the calls on other occasions weren't for me. That night, it was. So we need to listen closely so we know that when God makes a call, that it is for us. We need to listen closely enough to answer. And if we're not smart enough to do that, we should listen to our wives. One of the other great things is at the end of this story, in verse 44, it says, the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Jesus can make believers out of cynics. There were a whole mess of people around here that didn't really think this was going to happen. Now, how does this apply to us? It's because we as believers, what we have seen Jesus do in our lives is the strongest thing that we have to offer. What we have seen Jesus do to change us, what we call our testimony, our story, that is how we can be used by God to bring people to Jesus. These folks didn't believe it was going to happen. And again, that's part of why Jesus said, Lazarus, come out, so they would hear. And I mean, I don't know if this looked like a scene out of the old mummy movies or what it looked like, but he was wrapped in cloths and had been dead for 4 days and came walking out. I have a feeling that the folks who were in attendance that day suddenly believed rather strongly. And they were then able to go out and share that with other people and expand God's kingdom. They had seen, they were able to say, I can't be cynical anymore because I know what Jesus can do. Now for the history lesson. Because it seems like I got through that first part real quick, didn't it? I mentioned last week that our dear friend Paula Hebert had asked me, so for those 4 days that Lazarus was dead, where was he? And I said, I've asked a lot of people before, and no one's been able to answer. And I said, well, Paula, thank you for that challenge. I don't know, but I will do what I can to find you an answer. And Paula's not here today. Preach. Paula, I know maybe a couple days later, but we expect you're watching now. This was some of the most challenging study that I've done in a long time because it became a much bigger question than just what happened to Lazarus. I mean, he was just one guy. And we don't really know a whole lot about him other than this story. I don't know. I mean, he didn't seem to have an official biographer. Doesn't appear he kept a real detailed diary that was left for us to find later. So we don't know what happened to him. So the bigger question becomes, what happened to believers prior to Christ's death and resurrection? So that's where we're going. If you read through the Bible, and I'd strongly encourage you to do that, there is a term that creeps up a lot, and it is the word Sheol. Now, in some Bibles, that is simply translated as hell. In others, it's translated as damnation. It's translated as different things, and almost universally, it is with a negative term. But it doesn't seem to be just a negative thing. There seems to be a whole lot of scriptural evidence that pre-Jesus, everyone who died went there. In Ecclesiastes 9, 7 through 10, it says the following: Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil, in which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, to which you are going. Now, the first part of this, it says, God has already approved what you do. And then it says, in Sheol, to which you are going. So it seems to say that when you die, no matter what you were doing when you were here, that's where you're headed. Oh, we also read, in Genesis 37:35, when Jacob has heard that Joseph has died, so all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. And thus his father wept for him. Now, I don't think he believed that his son had gone to hell. I think that he was looking and saying, I know my son has died, and I desperately want to be with him. Now, there is also a story of a different guy named Lazarus. Lazarus and the rich man. In this parable, we're told about these two people who have died. Lazarus, who was poor and had nothing going for him in a worldly sense. And then this rich dude, who had everything going for him when he was alive. This poor guy loved God with everything he had. This rich guy couldn't be bothered with God. And we are told in this story that the rich guy is in a place that is really uncomfortable and pretty warm. And then Lazarus, he's kind of in this paradisal, that's not a word, paradise kind of place. And he's able to enjoy things, while the rich man can actually see what's going on over there. And we're told that he has no ability to cross it, but he can see what's happening. And that may be one of the more uncomfortable parts. If it's true that in hell we're aware of what we're missing, that would be pretty rough. But it tells us there is this separation. But it doesn't tell us that Lazarus has gone to heaven. It tells us that he is in a paradise. So we're kind of taught that there is a life force within us. We refer to it as our spirit. But that when we die, goes into Sheol. Hi, Lee. But this is a place where both the righteous and the wicked go at death. Now in Psalm 49:15, it says, like sheep they are appointed for Sheol. Death shall be their shepherd, and the upright shall rule over them in the morning. Their form shall be consumed in Sheol with no place to dwell, but God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. So if we're looking at the Sheol place as only a place of punishment and damnation, well, I don't understand how God could ransom us from there. Daniel 12:2, we read, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Again, we're being told that there are people who have died, and there's going to be things that are going to happen, good or bad for them, after they have awakened. So there's something that's going to happen from their physical death before their eternal resurrection. Psalm 16:10, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. Okay. Have I lost everyone yet? This was a whole new concept to me. In a lot of ways, it comes awfully close to the idea of purgatory. But that doesn't hold true in New Testamental church. We are told specifically that if we die without Jesus, we go to hell. If we die with Jesus, we go to heaven. We are told that. But pre-Jesus, there had to be different rules. We know the sacrificial system was a whole lot different back then. Because, man, you better own a whole lot of animals if you wanted to be forgiven of sin. Things were different. In Revelation 20:11 through 15, it says, then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. From his presence earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And then if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Man, in no way at all am I going to begin to consider myself an expert on this topic, because it's going to take a whole lot more research than this week. But there seems to be pretty strong and easily accessible information in the Bible that points to pre-Jesus death resulting in a bit of a holding pattern. Do I understand that completely? No, but I also don't understand why God loves me so much he let his son die for me. So to answer Paula's question, where did Lazarus go? I think he went to Sheol. Now, this is just also a John thing. Again, like I used to tell the kids in youth group, this is from the book of John 4. This is John Pappert's opinion. This is me, not in this book. I struggle with the idea that Jesus let Lazarus go to heaven for 4 days and then yanked him back, because that would seem almost unnecessarily cruel. And we are told heaven's going to be something we can't even imagine how great it's going to be. So to let him live there for 4 days and then go. And the other thing is, I have to believe that if he had seen that, he never would have stopped talking about it. And his diary would have survived. And the people he told about it would have told lots of other people about it. And they would have said, by the way, our buddy Lazarus has said, if you die and you're a good person and you know the Lord, you get to go to this place that is undescribably amazing. Well, we haven't heard about any of that. So it's hard for me to imagine that Lazarus went to heaven. And again, that's just me, so you're welcome to disagree with that. So in the long run, what does that mean? I don't know. I don't really know. I know that there are folks from the Old Testament that we're going to bump into in heaven. I'm pretty sure Abraham's going to be there. Pretty sure Jacob's going to be there. Pretty sure there's going to be a whole lot of folks that we read about that are going to be there who never met Jesus. And right now, they may be hanging out in the better living portion of Sheol. Because until Jesus comes again, until everyone is raised back up and they go through the book of life and death, well, they're kind of in holding, from the best of my understanding from 1 week of study. And by the way, if anyone else wants to take a crack at this, I think Smokey and I are welcome to surrender the pulpit to you for a day. You can give it a whirl. Bill? So that's a no.
Let's set the date.
Got plans next Sunday? Oh, next Sunday's Mother's Day. That would be a little rough for a Mother's Day. Okay. So back to the first part of our story. And here we come to our final thought. Oops. There's an unknown element to this story, and that is we do not know how Lazarus used his second chance. As I mentioned a little while ago, he's not mentioned again. Now, we are told in the book of John that if every miracle and every great work Jesus had done was recorded in book form, then there's basically no books that could contain it. I don't know about you all, though, but I would love to know what he did. I mean, he was dead for 4 days, and Jesus brought him back. What did you do? How did you take advantage of that? And I know who I was for the first 25 years of my life before I met Jesus. And I still get it wrong far more than I get it right, but I'm hoping that since I met him, since he pulled me out of that spiritual death, that I'm doing it a little bit better. And that is the part of the story that we still need to know. How do we use our second chance? You get to write that story. You get to determine, along with God, how that chapter ends for you. I hope you use the chance well. Listen to God. Hear what his calling is for you. I'm going to have our ushers come up. So, Carlene, Tori, Melissa. Now, as I'm thinking about this as well, when we become Christians, it's almost like our final test. Now, of course, anyone in here who's a student is not delighted about the fact that finals week either has already happened or will soon be happening. But once you've taken that final exam, the only thing left is, I've done the test. How do I apply this to the rest of my life? What do I do next? I was talking to one of my daughters this week, and she was talking about a test. Now, her test was a little bit unusual in that it only had one question. The great thing is that the answer to her test was the one we wanted. And Melissa, if you look up at the screen there, and now you know why my folks are really here. Quick announcement to the church. Melissa and I are going to be grandparents. By the way, this was Amanda's idea. It's also why the camera is still rolling. So many of you here know the difficulties that Amanda and Brandon have gone through in order to have a child. She had IVF treatment and vitro fertilization treatment a couple of weeks ago, and she got the final word on Friday that she is pregnant. Keeping this a secret for the last couple of days has been tough. My aunt flew in this weekend, and she was supposed to hang out in Cheyenne for a few days, and then my dad and I had to make up a story about why they were coming, and Melissa yelled at me because the house was still a mess. And so, honey, I hope you forgive me now. But for so many of you who have prayed consistently for Amanda's desire to become a mom, for that to come true, thank you, because prayer works. Father, I thank you for our message today, and I thank you for the message from Amanda on Friday. God, we know that through what your Son has done, his sacrifice on the cross, we have a chance for a great second life. Lord, I thank you that you comfort us, you come alongside us, you encourage us, and that you love us. Father, I thank you for Grace First Church and their commitment to love our family. So God, thanks that we're growing our family. In Jesus' name. And thank you for the offerings that are coming, and please bless them too.